Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and we're talking today with Elise Stephens, who is a novelist. And you're thinking, why are we talking to a novelist on a business podcast? And the answer is that Elise has managed to go and put out book after book while raising two small kids at home and having her husband work from home, and yet continually able to create this creative space, to maintain that creative space, to maintain that creative fuel to go and literally create new worlds. So in this interview, we're going to go dive into how it is that Elise manages to create the space. And we're going to learn some lessons here that all of us entrepreneurs, many of us who work from a home office environment, are going to be able to better create and stay focused on that creation. Elise, welcome to Redbeard Radio.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I am so thrilled. And I'm also thrilled, folks listening at home or in your cars or wherever, that Elise is one of the friends from my really post-college days, one of my oldest friends at this point. And I think we first met each other, Elise, back in roughly 2005 or 2006. And
That sounds about right.
It's always a delight to talk with people who you've known for a long time. Because if you think about the seasons of life we go through, there's so many seasons we walk through to get to where we are. And now you're an author. You're making money as an author. This is what you do. And you've gone from just some casual writing to actually having multiple books out. So before we go into your process of your creative space, can you tell us a bit about your body of work, about your books, about what you do as a writer?
Yeah. So I currently write fantasy and science fiction. That's been a genre that I gradually warmed into. I didn't start deciding that was exactly what I was going to write. I always loved adventure stories and I always loved magic. So maybe doing the math on that isn't very hard. but that's where I am, and that's the world that I love to create in and exist mentally and emotionally inside of. I have 3 novels that are out. One is a retelling of a Greek myth set in modern day Seattle, kind of a love story. Another is a urban fantasy that deals with family and seeing the future and protecting ourselves from people who have hurt us. And my most recent one is a historical fantasy about a young boy discovering a dragon egg, and it deals a lot with being a hero and what we think that looks like and what that may look like, and sacrifices, and growing up before you have to when you're young. So that's a little bit about my work. I also do a bunch of short stories. I'm really interested in relationships, in particular, family relationships between siblings or parent to child. I find those really fascinating and really complex and really fun to throw magic or science into the middle as the wrench that just complicates everything. So I love complicating things.
Now I want to read all your books, but tell us, how do you find time to write?
Finding time to write in my world is making time to write, saying, I have this goal, I have to figure out how to fit it. And in different seasons of life, that has to change depending on what's on your plate and what your other responsibilities are. One of the things I do as a mom, I have two young kids, one elementary, the other is entering kindergarten this next year. So I'll have 2 kids of school age. I homeschool, which is a huge priority to me, and the quality of education and the time I get with my kids. So I have to divide my day between homeschooling, which you could call the day job, and writing, which is definitely fit in this more, part-time as I can sort of mode. I've talk a lot about what I do, and I have enlisted help of people who believe enough in what I do, have seen how much I am dedicated toward it, and want to support that. So I have, in my case, I have help from my mother-in-law and my mother in getting some of that childcare. I continue to find ways to make that work with like drop-in childcare and different play dates and summer camps and that sort of thing. But it's always been for me a difficult balance between if I have to pay for it, paying for something that gives me that time, and being able to work on it in a way that doesn't necessarily pay back right away, and
It's
still validating that as worthwhile.
it's one thing to create some free space, but it's another thing to be able to engage in a highly creative pursuit with a freed up space if your energy isn't in that mode. Like you go straight from teaching your kids about geography and then, oh, now you have an hour of time, but you're somehow able to switch and alchemize your soul into the creative space. How do you do that? Do you have, are these
Mhm.
like crazy Elise rituals where you have just this way you do it so that you always show up at your writing desk? Do you even have a writing desk that is the place where you create all these books?
My favorite place to create is in coffee shops. So in that case, I don't
Hmm.
have a writing desk. I do have a particular table by the window at the local coffee shop near my house, and the baristas who know me at all know that that's my table. And they will. So I've had one walk in and be like, "Oh my goodness, your table isn't clean. Just a second, I'll clean it for you," which cracks me up. So it's just I definitely am a creature of habit and ritual. I tend to write at the same times in the week. I plan ahead for them. I think that over time, I've learned to take massive project notes. I will even tell myself what I'm working on in a given day. I'll plan it a week ahead and say, Tuesday, you're typing up these notes, you're creating this new scene, and you are writing that blog post. And that's out that day. I open up my my planner and I look at it and go, okay, those are the things I do. I don't have to spend any energy thinking about what it will be. And I outline and I plan. I know what the story's emotional tone is supposed to be. I usually know what the scene is that needs to go, and I know what the four scenes are after it. So it allows me to simply drop into the creative creation if I've done all
Doesn't
that planning ahead of time.
Doesn't that feel a bit robotic to know exactly what's happening all the time? That's sort of the opposite of this vision of the writer who sits down with a blank page and lets the words pour forth from her soul. Instead, you have this, it feels sort of robotic, right? Like you know exactly what you're doing. How do you how do you allow the space to be creative when everything is so planned?
I don't tend to see it as confining. I find when I
Hmm.
have the structure and the box laid out, I then finally feel like I have the creativity to fill it in and embellish it any way I want to, because I'm not distracted by some of those big decisions. If I'm
Okay.
approaching it and I have like no idea, I will probably use all my energy trying to answer those questions. What does the character want? What are they going for in this scene? What is the big struggle? What is the tiny struggle that's going to be worked out just in this little bit of dialogue?
So the box is more like a wall defending your creative space from distractions, and you've classified what should I write about as a distraction, which you will deal with outside the wall. So by the
Yes.
time, and maybe a house is a better thing. So by the time you open the door to your house where you write, which happens to be a coffee shop table, you close that door, you lock that sucker with a 60-minute time lock on it, and then nothing else can bother you in that time. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that's getting to it. I do tell people that I tend to write more like an engineer than say a painter.
Hmm.
I with how I like to have things worked out beforehand. But yeah, I do feel that that allows for greater creativity and freedom.
Now, were you like that before kids, before homeschooling, when you had a lot more free time, or have you always been more of that write like an engineer, not like a painter?
I would say that planning for the time to come, like planning ahead and saying, I'm doing this on Tuesday, I'm doing this on Thursday, that happened more when I had kids simply because I didn't have as much time to waste.
Hmm.
But I've always enjoyed outlining and knowing roughly where the story is going before I jump into it.
You know a lot of other writers, I
Mhm.
assume. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that your method of very careful time blocking? I guess my question is, how rare is that? Are you really weird and most writers are like my fantasy picture of a writer of the painter? Or are you like what Stephen Pressfield would call the professional? And yeah, there's amateurs out there, but all the professionals are more like you.
I would love to say all the professionals are more like me, but they're not. I have friends who actually write much more tidily than I do because they're editors and everything they write has been thought out and it's fairly done by the time they're done with it. My drafts are incredibly messy and I have to go through them multiple times and often decide, oh, that wasn't where I was going. I'm going to have to rewrite that whole thing. Um, uh, as far as if people plan as much as I do, I tend to be on the slightly more extreme end of the outliners. They often call them discovery writers versus outliners. And then there's
Mm.
just a spectrum. And there's the writer that loves to just discover as they go, which ends up being fine. It just often means there is quite a bit of revision on the other side of that. And I hate revising, so I don't want to have more than I need to.
Now that's really interesting. You have a constrained availability of time. You've created a box around the time, and one of the distractions you've excluded from that to the greatest extent possible is revising,
Mm-hmm.
which most of us would call editing who aren't serious writers. But you've taken that out, and that's really interesting because in writing emails or anything else, yeah, there's a certain amount of what in my world we call quality assurance time, QA time. Is the
Right.
thing actually how it's supposed to be? Does it work right? And you've managed to just sort of separate and minimize that. It feels like you open your cupboard in the kitchen, and if all these knickknacks and dishes start falling out because there's too much stuff in there, it's really hard to get what you need to get. But if everything has a shelf and there's plenty of open space around each thing, it's really fast to get things, and it's really fast to put them away. You spend almost no time on the transaction costs. So how is it that you figured out how to spend minimum time on the transaction cost of revision?
I would say, as a caveat, minimum time, meaning I would like to spend 6 months rather than 2.5 years revising a book. So there is definitely a good deal of time spent on revision still. I just would like to cut it down for me and my impatient self. As far as I'm trying to go back, what was your question?
How did you eliminate or reduce?
Mm,
I'm curious. Was this one of those things where you used to spend? Well, let me ask you this: between your three books you have published, you said 2.5 years is normal. You've had a 6 months of revision time. Were you a 2.5 year person on book one, and now you've gotten better, and now you're 6 months, or were you always 6 months, and other writers were 2.5 years, and you said, "I don't want to be like that."
it was I Forecast, which is my second book. I don't even know how long it took me to revise my first book. I wasn't even on the clock then because it was just my first project. Forecast, my second book, the urban fantasy, took me about 2.5 years to edit,
Wow.
and I think I was somewhere in the ballpark of 6, maybe 8 months in revising the book. After that, I'm thinking of a book that's currently not published that took me about the 6 to 8 month time window. So I've definitely shortened it. One of the ways I did that was combing through it before it was done, checking the first bit, making sure it was cohesive, then checking the next quarter, making sure those bits were cohesive together. I was able to avoid a lot of the what in the world happened, you dropped that thread feedback from readers. I'm also learning to okay, so feedback is a very, very big part of my creative process. Once I have something that is intelligible enough to share, revised enough to share, sharing it with a very careful, insightful reader, not necessarily a writer, who can give me feedback of what's working, and they usually give it in the big picture. I can then go back and I get better and better at understanding how to take their feedback of I'm confused about this and turning it into a very precise question of this is what you can do to fix it. And I think that those things are what have taught me and helped me develop a faster revision time, is turning feedback into very precise directions on fixing the manuscript.
That is something that applies to all of our projects. I once built a tool, I called it Smart Campaign Reports, where I could do magic. Like I could tell you which salespeople were making more profit per hour of which day and which hour of the day based on what they were selling
Mhm.
by looking at Google Analytics data and profit data and all kinds of fanciness. And I built this big idea, and I built maybe a third of it out and just described the rest of it. And then I went to find buyers, and almost no one cared. Like two people cared. And it was
Oh
tragic.
no.
I thought, here I am. I feel so smart. I'm brilliant. And then I built something that no one wants. It's too complicated. And there wasn't a really valid use case. And in retrospect, I could have sketched out the idea, and this is now more and more common, sketched out the idea, made a sales video for it, put it up for pre-order, And then if I didn't get to X many pre-orders, don't do it, because
Right.
either the idea sucks or the way you're selling it sucks. And either one
Yeah.
of these is a fatal error. You have to fix it before you move forward, unless you want to waste energy. And like you, I don't have energy. I don't have extra energy that I just want to sort of burn and toss away. I want to get
Right.
an ROI out of every hour, every minute I spend at work. So that getting feedback is really interesting.
I
Yeah,
couldn't do without it.
I'm seeing, yeah, well, I'm seeing there's a whole course here about how you write a book, the Elise writing method, about,
Yes.
and especially given not just two small kids, but homeschooling two small kids, and you still get out of the book. And here's the thing, you still improve your process from 2.5 years to 6 to 8 months of revision work, that you have enough energy or enough awareness to improve your process, even as you have all these other distractions around.
Yeah, another thing is, when juggling between multiple different, responsibilities is simply that very hard window of when I'm doing this, I'm not doing the other thing. And having those boundaries, going both ways. When I'm working, I am not dealing with other I'm not dealing with scheduling, I'm not dealing with paying bills, I'm not dealing with, and I'm writing. When I'm homeschooling the kids, like it's all focused on that, and I don't want my work to bleed into my time with my family or vice versa. I think having those strong delineations is a gift to yourself and your psychological wellness.
That is beautifully put, Elise. For folks who want to go get your books or follow along on your writer's journey, where's the best place to find you?
I would start on my author website, which is my name, elisestephens.com, ELISESTEPHENS.com. You can find most of my books there. You can find my blog there. There's a link to my Patreon if you are interested in seeing excerpts of my current work draft. I send that to patrons, drafts of my fantasy novel that I'm writing right now. Yeah, lots of good stuff there. So I would start there.
Wonderful. Folks, EliseStephens.com. Elise, thank you for being on Redbeard Radio.
Thank you for having me.